The city never slept, but from the top floor of Coal Enterprises Tower, it looked almost peaceful. Far below, headlights crawled through the streets like restless fireflies, and skyscrapers pierced the night sky like silent giants. Inside the glass-walled office, everything was still. Too still for a man whose name alone could move markets. Ethan Cole stood by the window, his reflection staring back at him. Sharp jaw, tailored suit, perfect posture. A billionaire, a CEO, a man who had everything except certainty. His fingers tightened slightly around the glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. Behind him, the office door opened quietly. "Sir," his assistant Daniel said carefully. "The board is waiting." Ethan didn't turn. "Let them wait." Daniel hesitated. That alone was unusual. Ethan Cole was not a man who delayed meetings, especially not board meetings. "They're discussing the quarterly reports," Daniel added cautiously. "There are concerns." Ethan finally turned, his expression calm but distant. "I've read the reports." And Ethan walked past him slowly, placing the glass on the desk without taking a sip. "They're clean." Daniel frowned slightly. "Isn't that a good thing?" Ethan let out a quiet, humorless chuckle. "No," he said. "It's not." For months, Ethan had been reviewing internal reports from his supermarket chain, one of the largest and most profitable arms of his empire. On paper, everything was flawless. Profits were rising, employee turnover was within acceptable limits, customer satisfaction was high. Too high. It didn't sit right with him because reality was never that perfect. He had built his empire from nothing, sleeping in cramped apartments, taking risks. No sane person would take learning the hard way that behind every polished report was a mess someone had cleaned up or hidden. And lately something felt hidden. First, it was small things, anonymous complaints that never made it past middle management. A cashier who had sent an email and then resigned the next day. A supplier who hinted at irregular practices before suddenly cutting off communication. Every thread he pulled disappeared like someone was cleaning up before he could see the dirt. "I want to visit one of the branches," Ethan said suddenly. Daniel blinked. "Of course. I'll arrange a tour." "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "No announcements. No preparation. No heads up." Daniel frowned. "That's not advisable, sir." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze sharp now. "If they know I'm coming, what will I see?" Daniel didn't answer. "Exactly," Ethan said quietly. A long silence settled between them. Then Daniel spoke again, more cautiously this time. "So what are you suggesting?" Ethan's lips curved slightly, not in amusement, but in decision. "I'm going in as one of them." Daniel stared at him. "Sir, a job applicant," Ethan continued calmly. "Entry level. No experience." "That's insane." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're the face of $1 billion company," Daniel pressed. "You can't just walk into one of your stores pretending to be a nobody." Ethan finished. The word hung in the air. Daniel didn't respond. Ethan turned back toward the window. "That's exactly what I need to be. There are things happening in my company that I'm not being told." Ethan said, his voice quieter now but heavier. "People are suffering, and someone is making sure I never hear about it." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "We can launch an internal investigation. They'll cover it up." "How can you be sure?" Ethan's reflection stared back at him again. "Because if they're bold enough to do it," he said slowly, "they're smart enough to hide it." Silence. "Then I need to see the truth," Ethan said, "not the version they prepare for me." The next morning didn't begin in a boardroom. It began in a small, quiet apartment on the outskirts of the city. Daniel watched in disbelief as Ethan stepped out of the bathroom looking like a completely different person. Gone was the expensive haircut, replaced with rough, uneven trimming. His designer beard was now slightly overgrown. The tailored suit replaced with a faded shirt and worn trousers that looked like they had seen too many hard days. Even his posture had changed, less commanding, more reserved. It was unsettling. "You don't even look like yourself," Daniel muttered. Ethan adjusted the sleeve of his shirt. "That's the point." Daniel crossed his arms. "And your name?" Ethan paused for a moment, then said Eli. Eli, Daniel repeated. Ethan nodded. "Simple. Forgettable." Daniel sighed deeply. "I still think this is a terrible idea." Ethan smirked slightly. "Good. That means no one else will expect it." Before leaving, Ethan turned serious. "No one must know," he said. Daniel nodded reluctantly. "Not the board. Not the managers. No one." "And if something goes wrong?" Daniel asked. Ethan looked at him. "Then I'll handle it." There was something in his tone, calm, but unshakable. It reminded Daniel exactly why this man had built an empire from nothing. The supermarket stood tall and busy just like any other. Customers moved in and out. Workers hurried through tasks. Carts rolled across the tiled floors. To anyone else, it was normal. To Ethan, it was a battlefield disguised as routine. He stood across the street for a moment, observing. No one recognized him. No one looked twice. For the first time in years, he was invisible and strangely felt liberating. Ethan took a deep breath and walked in. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss. Cool air rushed over him, and just like that, the CEO disappeared and Eli, the job seeker, took his place. The store was busy, but something felt off. Not chaos, not disorganization, something subtler. Tension. He noticed it in the way employees moved, quick, cautious, avoiding eye contact, in the way a worker flinched slightly when a supervisor walked past, in the forced smiles at the checkout counters. This wasn't a healthy workplace. This was survival. "Hey, you." The voice was sharp. Ethan turned. A man in a crisp shirt approached him with a scowl. "Mr. Briggs." Even without introduction, Ethan knew. Power clung to him, not the kind built on fear. "What are you standing there for?" Briggs snapped. "This isn't a park. I came to ask for his voice slightly playing the part. Briggs looked him up and down slowly, judging, dismissing. "Experience? Not much, sir, but I learn fast." Briggs scoffed. "We don't need smart people here, just people who follow instructions." Ethan nodded obediently. "I can do that." Pause. "Then come tomorrow," Briggs said lazily. "If you're late, don't bother." Relief flickered across Ethan's face. "Perfectly acted. Thank you, sir." Briggs had already turned away. To him, Ethan was nothing, and that was exactly what Ethan needed. Ethan turned to leave, and that's when he heard it. A soft sound, barely. He paused. His eyes shifted toward the checkout area. There a young woman stood behind the counter scanning items. Her head was slightly lowered. Her movements were slow, and though she tried to hide it, tears slipped down her face. She wiped them quickly, forcing a smile at the customer in front of her, but the pain was still there, raw, unhidden, if you knew where to look. Ethan's chest tightened. Something about it wasn't just sadness, it was helplessness. For a moment, he just stood there watching, thinking. This was why he came. Not the reports, not the numbers. This, a real person, real pain, hidden in plain sight. Ethan clenched his jaw slightly. Whatever was happening in this store, he was going to uncover it, all of it. And as he turned to walk out, his gaze lingered on the girl one last time. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story, but something told him this was only the beginning. The next morning arrived with a heaviness Ethan hadn't felt in years. Not the pressure of billion-dollar deals. Not the weight of boardroom decisions. This was different. This was uncertainty. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't walking into a Space where he controlled everything. Today he was just a man hoping not to be rejected. The small apartment was quiet, almost unfamiliar. Ethan stood in front of a cracked mirror adjusting the collar of his faded shirt. The fabric felt rough against his skin, a far cry from the soft tailored suits he was used to. He studied his reflection carefully. Messy hair, slightly tired eyes closed that told a story of struggle. Eli, not Ethan. He exhaled, slowly. Let's see what your world really looks like. He muttered under his breath. There was no driver waiting downstairs, no security detail, no luxury car. Instead, he stepped out onto the street and flagged down a public taxi. The driver barely glanced at him. No recognition, no respect, just another passenger. Ethan sat back quietly, watching the city pass by in a way he hadn't in years. He noticed things now: the roadside vendors setting up early, workers in worn uniforms, rushing to jobs that barely paid enough. People already exhausted before the day had even begun. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like one of them. When he arrived at the supermarket, the energy was already tense. Employees moved quickly, almost nervously. A young stock boy nearly dropped a crate when a supervisor barked at him. "Careful, idiot. You break that, it comes out of your salary." The boy mumbled an apology, his hands shaking as he picked it up. Ethan's jaw tightened. This again, fear everywhere. He hadn't even clocked in yet, and already he could feel it pressing against the walls. "Hey, you came back." Ethan turned. It was one of the older workers, a woman arranging items on a shelf. Her tone held mild surprise. "Most people don't," she added quietly. Ethan gave a small, polite smile. "I need the job." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded knowingly. "Then keep your head down," she said, "and don't argue with management." There was a warning in her voice, not advice, a survival rule. Before Ethan could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "You new guy, Mr. Briggs." Briggs approached with his usual cold expression. "You're late." Ethan blinked. "It's still 5 minutes before." "I said you're late." The words landed like a slap. Ethan paused. He could correct him. He could point out the obvious. He could remind him who he really was. Instead, "I'm sorry, sir," he said quietly. Briggs smirked slightly. Good. Submission. That's what he wanted. "Follow me." Briggs led him through the store at a brisk pace, barely looking back to see if Ethan was keeping up. "You don't need training," he said dismissively. "This isn't a corporate office. You carry, you stock, you clean. That's it." "Yes, sir." "You make mistakes, you pay for them." Ethan's brows furrowed slightly. "From my salary." Briggs stopped walking and turned slowly. "You ask too many questions." Pause. Then with a thin smile. "Yes, from your salary." Ethan nodded again, hiding the flicker of anger behind his calm expression. So it was true. Illegal deductions right in the open. As they walked further, Briggs continued. "No unnecessary talking, no loitering, no forming friendships during work hours." Ethan almost let out a dry laugh. Friendships? Here? It didn't look like anyone even had the emotional space for that. "If I call you Briggs," added, "you respond immediately." "Yes, sir. And don't think because you're new I'll go easy on you." Ethan met his gaze briefly. "I wouldn't expect you to." For a split second something flickered in Briggs' eyes. Suspicion, maybe, but it passed quickly. "You'll start as a floor assistant," Briggs said. "Stocking, shelves cleaning, running errands." Ethan nodded. "Report to whoever tells you to do something." Briggs added, "Everyone here outranks you." A deliberate humiliation. Ethan accepted it, understood. Briggs waved him off like he was dismissing a stray. "Get to work." Ethan was handed a box almost immediately. Heavy, awkward. Top shelf. A worker muttered without even looking at him. No instructions, no guidance, just expectation. Ethan carried it, carefully observing everything as he moved. The silence between workers, the quick glances, the tension whenever Briggs walked by. This wasn't a workplace. It was a controlled environment, and everyone was walking on eggshells. It happened mid-morning. Ethan was arranging items when he heard a familiar voice. "Next customer, please." He turned slightly, her the same girl from yesterday. She stood behind the register scanning items with practiced efficiency. But now that he was closer, he could see it clearly. The faint redness in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly, the forced smile. She was still hurting and no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to get involved. Their eyes met briefly just for a second. She looked away quickly, almost like she wasn't allowed to be seen. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest again. He didn't know her, didn't know her story, but he knew pain when he saw it, and hers wasn't small. Hours past work piled up. No breaks were announced, no one stopped unless told to. At one point, a young worker whispered to Ethan, "If you need to use the restroom, go fast. If he notices you're gone too long, he'll cut your pay." Ethan stared at him. "You're serious?" The boy nodded nervously. Ethan exhaled slowly. This was worse than he thought. Then it happened. A loud crash echoed through the store. Everyone froze. A crate of bottled drinks had fallen. One of the newer workers standing beside it, pale with fear. Briggs appeared almost instantly. "What happened here? I'm sorry, sir." It slipped. Before the boy could finish, slap. The sound echoed. Ethan's entire body went still. Briggs had struck him in front of everyone. "You think this is a joke?" Briggs snapped. "Do you know how much that costs?" "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't pay for damages." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't fight back, didn't defend himself, just stood there and took it. Ethan's fists clenched tightly. Every instinct in him screamed to step in, to stop it, to end it right there. But he didn't, not yet, because one move too early and everything would collapse. As Briggs walked away muttering threats, the store slowly returned to movement. But something had changed, at least for Ethan. This wasn't just harassment. This was abuse. Physical, emotional, financial, and it was happening under his name, his company, his responsibility. The realization hit him hard. He had built an empire, but somewhere along the way he had lost control of what it had become. By the time the shift ended, Ethan's body ached. Not because he wasn't strong, but because he wasn't used to this kind of work anymore. This kind of exhaustion, the kind that settled into your bones. Employees clocked out quietly, avoiding unnecessary interaction. No laughter, no relief, just escape. As Ethan made his way toward the exit, he slowed slightly near the checkout. She was still there, counting the register alone. Her shoulders were slightly slumped, tired, drained. And then he saw it. Tear fell again, quickly wiped away like it had no right to exist. Ethan hesitated. Should he say something? No, not yet. He needed to be careful. But as he walked past, he made a silent decision. Tomorrow he would talk to her. Because whatever she was going through, it wasn't something she should face alone. The second day had been exhausting, but the third day, that was when everything truly began. Ethan barely slept. The small apartment felt tighter than usual, the silence heavier. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same things replaying in his mind. The slap, the fear in the young worker's eyes, the tension in the store, and her, the girl behind the counter, the way she had tried to smile through tears. It stayed with him. It bothered him more than anything else, because pain like that didn't come from one bad day, came from something deeper, something ongoing. He sat up on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "This is worse than I thought." he muttered, and for the first time since starting this mission felt personal. By the time Ethan arrived at the supermarket, the morning rush had already begun. Customers flooded in, voices overlapped, carts rolled endlessly. But beneath all that noise, the same tension lingered. It was subtle, but once you noticed it, you couldn't unsee it. Employees spoke carefully, moved quickly, avoided attention. Ethan blended in easily, now head down, quiet, observant, invisible, exactly how he needed to be. It didn't take long to find her. She was at register 3, same position, same forced smile. But today she looked worse. Her eyes were slightly swollen, her movements slower, like she had cried more than she had slept. Ethan felt something twist inside him. He didn't like it, didn't like how much it affected him. But he couldn't ignore it either. He waited, watched for the right moment. It came during a brief lull when her line finally cleared. Ethan approached slowly, carrying a small item to make it look natural. She didn't look up immediately. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice almost mechanical. "Morning," Ethan replied. She scanned the item. Their fingers brushed briefly as she handed him the receipt, and for a second she froze just slightly. Then she pulled her hand back quickly. "Next customer, please," she called out, even though there was no one behind him yet. A dismissal, gentle but clear. Ethan stepped aside, not pushing, not yet. From a distance, he watched her again, and this time he noticed more. The way she flinched slightly whenever footsteps approached from behind, the way her eyes flickered toward the manager's office every few minutes, the way her shoulders stiffened whenever Mr. Briggs walked past. Fear, not general fear. Targeted fear. Ethan's jaw tightened. It's him. He didn't need confirmation, not yet, but his instincts were already connecting the pieces. The opportunity came later that afternoon. Ethan had been sent to dispose of trash behind the store, a task no one seemed eager to do. The back area was quiet, isolated, the kind of place where people could breathe away from watchful eyes. As he stepped outside, he heard something again, soft, broken, quiet sob. He froze, then turned slowly. There, she was sitting on a low concrete step behind the building, her back slightly hunched, her face buried in her hands, crying, not the silent, controlled tears from inside. This was different. This was raw, unfiltered, like she had finally run out of strength to hold it in. Ethan hesitated. This was a fragile moment. He could walk away, pretend he didn't see, respect her privacy, but something in him refused, because no one should have to cry like that alone. He set the trash down quietly, making sure not to startle her. Then slowly, he stepped closer. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said gently. She stiffened instantly, wiping her face quickly. "I'm fine," she said, her voice shaky. "I'll be back inside in a minute." Ethan didn't move. "I know that kind of fine," he said softly. She looked up at him, then really looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were red, glossy with tears, and filled with something deeper than sadness, exhaustion. "Please," she said quietly. "Just leave it." Ethan shook his head slightly. "I can," he said, "but I don't think I should." She stared at him for a long moment, suspicious, tired, guarded. "You don't even know me," she said. Ethan nodded. "You're right," he admitted. "I don't." A pause. "But I know what it looks like when someone is carrying too much alone." Something flickered in her expression, a crack, small but real. She looked away, biting her lips slightly. "I'm used to it," she whispered. That hit him harder than anything else. Used to it, not surprised. Not shocked, just used to it. No one should be used to this, Ethan said quietly. Silence stretched between them for a moment. "Then I'm Eli," he said gently. She hesitated, then finally Lila. Her voice was soft, careful, like even saying her name required effort. Ethan nodded. "It's nice to meet you, Lila." She gave a faint, almost non-existent smile. "It's not exactly a great place to meet someone." Ethan let out a small breath of amusement. "Fair point." They sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward, just quiet. Then Ethan spoke again. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "But if you want to, I'll listen." Lila stared at the ground, her fingers twisted together nervously. "It's nothing," she said weakly. Ethan didn't respond immediately, just waited. And that patience, that lack of pressure, it did something, because slowly, her defenses began to slip. "It's just work," she said finally. "It's stressful. That's all." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Work doesn't make people cry like that," he said gently. She swallowed hard. Her eyes filled again, and this time she couldn't stop it. "It's him," she whispered. Ethan's expression didn't change, but inside everything sharpened. "Who?" he asked softly. She let out a shaky breath. "The manager." Confirmation. Ethan's fists clenched slightly at his sides, but his voice remained calm. "What about him?" Lila hesitated. Fear flickered across her face again, like even speaking about it was dangerous. She started, then stopped. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You're safe out here," he said quietly. A lie maybe, but one she needed to hear. And then she broke. "He won't leave me alone," she said, her voice trembling. "No matter what I do." Ethan's chest tightened. "He keeps calling me into his office." She continued, making excuses, saying I'm not doing my job right even when I am. Her hands shook. "If I try to avoid him, he cuts my hours." Ethan's jaw hardened. "If I speak up, he threatens to fire me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And if I stay..." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Ethan already understood. "I need this job," Lila said quickly, almost defensively. "I don't have a choice." Ethan looked at her carefully. "There's always a choice," he said. She shook her head immediately. "No," she said firmly. "Not for me." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I have 2 younger siblings," she added quietly. "I'm all they have." That explained everything. The fear, the silence, the endurance. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting them. Ethan exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a workplace issue anymore. This was someone's life, someone's survival, and someone was abusing that. He looked at her, his voice steady. "You don't deserve this," he said. Lila let out a weak, broken laugh. "Deserve doesn't matter," she whispered. "Surviving does." Ethan held her gaze. "For now," he said quietly. She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Ethan stood slowly, picking up the trash bag again. "It means things don't stay like this forever." There was something in his tone, something calm, certain, unshakable. Lila noticed it but didn't fully understand it, not yet. As they walked back toward the store, something had changed. Not everything. The pain was still there. The fear hadn't disappeared. But now she wasn't carrying it alone. And Ethan, he had found exactly what he came for, the truth. But he had also found something unexpected, someone who mattered, someone worth fighting for. And as he pushed the door open, stepping back into the controlled chaos of the store, one thought settled firmly in his mind. This ends. Not someday, not eventually, soon. The rest of that day didn't feel the same, not for Ethan, not after what Lila had told him. He moved through the store like before, lifting boxes, arranging shelves, responding to orders, but his mind was no longer just observing. Now it was calculating. Every glance, every tone, every interaction, it all meant something now, because he wasn't just looking for issues anymore. He was looking for proof. Before, the tension in the store had been a suspicion. Now it had a face, Mr. Briggs, and a victim, Lila. But something told Ethan this wasn't limited to just one person. People like Briggs didn't stop at one target. They created systems, patterns, fear. And the more Ethan watched, the clearer that pattern became. It started with small things most people would overlook. A worker hesitating before answering Briggs, another quickly correcting themselves mid-sentence to avoid his irritation, a cashier apologizing repeatedly for something that wasn't even their fault. And then the biggest sign of all. No one complained, not openly, not even quietly, because this wasn't a place where complaints were heard. It was a place where complaints were punished. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself in the storage room again, stacking inventory, working silently, but not alone. Two workers stood nearby, speaking in hushed voices. "He did it again yesterday," one of them whispered. Ethan didn't look up, just listened. To who, the other asked. A pause. Then, "Who do you think?" Silence followed. Heavy, uncomfortable. "Why doesn't she report?" Him, the second voice asked, a bitter scoff. "And lose her job, like Sandra did." Ethan's hand paused mid-motion. Sandra. Another name. Another story. "What happened to her?" the second worker asked quietly. "You're new, so you don't know," the first said. "She tried to speak up. Next week she was gone. No explanation. No pay for her last shifts either." Ethan's jaw tightened. Retaliation. Suppression. Pattern of control. Ethan stepped out of the storage room a few minutes later, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just harassment. This was an entire system built on fear and silence. And it had been running long enough for people to accept it as normal. That was the most dangerous part. When injustice stops shocking people, it starts surviving. Ethan shifted his focus. If he wanted to bring Briggs down, he needed more than stories. He needed evidence. So he began to watch him closely. Briggs didn't hide his behavior. That was the shocking part. He didn't need to, because no one dared challenge him. That evening, Ethan saw it again. Lila had just finished with a customer when Briggs approached her counter. "Office," he said shortly. No explanation, no room for refusal. Lila froze, just for a second, then nodded quietly. "Yes, sir." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He watched as she stepped out from behind the counter, her movements slower now, reluctant, bracing. And then she walked toward the back hallway, toward his office. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Every instinct in him screamed to follow, to stop it, to intervene. But he forced himself to stay still, because acting without proof would ruin everything. Time slowed. Every second stretched. Ethan tried to focus on his task, but his attention kept drifting toward that hallway, toward that door. He watched the clock. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Too long. Far too long. Something inside him burned. A quiet rage. Controlled, but growing. When Lila finally came back, something was different. She wasn't crying. Not this time. But that didn't mean things were better. It was worse. Because now she looked empty. Her eyes were dull, her movements mechanical, like something inside her had shut down. Ethan swallowed hard. That look, he had seen it before, in people who had been pushed too far for too long. He waited until her shift ended, until she stepped outside again. This time she didn't sit. She just stood there, staring at nothing. Ethan approached slowly. "Lila." She didn't react immediately. Then slowly she turned. "Oh, it's you," she said softly. Ethan studied her face. "What did he do?" he asked gently. She shook her head quickly. "Nothing." The word came too fast, too rehearsed. Ethan didn't push. Not directly. "Instead, you don't have to protect him," he said quietly. Her eyes flickered. "I'm not," she whispered. "You are," Ethan replied calmly. Silence. Then her composure cracked again. "He said if I keep ignoring him, he'll make sure I lose this job," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan's expression darkened. "He already cut my hours last week," she added. "I barely made enough to cover rent." Her hands shook as she spoke. "And today?" She hesitated. Ethan waited. He said, "Next time it won't just be my hours." That was it. The line. The confirmation. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was coercion. Ethan spoke carefully. "Has he done this to others?" Lila hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "But no one talks about it." "Why?" She let out a hollow laugh. "Because talking doesn't change anything," she said. "It just makes things worse." Ethan's gaze hardened. "Not always." She looked at him. There it was, again. That tone. That quiet confidence. "You don't understand," she said softly. "People like him, they don't get punished." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "People like him only don't get punished when no one stands against them." For a moment, Lila just stared at him. Something unfamiliar flickered in her eyes. Hope. Small. Fragile. But dangerous. "Even if that's true," she said. "Who would stand against him?" Ethan didn't answer immediately because the truth was complicated. "I will," he said finally. The words were simple but heavy. Lila blinked. "You?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Yes." She shook her head gently. "You'll lose your job." Ethan almost smiled. "If that's the cost," he said, "then so be it." That night Ethan didn't go straight home. Instead, he sat in the dimly lit apartment, a notebook open in front of him. He began writing. Everything. Dates, incidents, names, patterns. He mapped it out like a business strategy, because in a way that's exactly what it was. A strategy to dismantle a corrupt system. But this time the stakes weren't profit. They were people. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. When he started this, he wanted answers. Now he wanted justice, and not the quiet kind. Not the kind buried in reports and internal memos. Real justice. Visible. Unavoidable. Final. He thought about Lila, her tears, her fear, her strength, and the way she still showed up every day despite everything. "She deserves better," he murmured. And not just her. All of them. The workers. The ones too afraid to speak. The ones who had already been pushed out. The ones still enduring. Ethan sat forward again, his eyes sharp with determination. "This ends," he said quietly. "Not as a thought, not as a wish, but as a decision." By the fifth day, Ethan had fully disappeared. Not physically, but in presence, in importance. In the eyes of everyone around him, he was nothing. And that was exactly where he wanted to be. Ethan moved slower now. Not enough to get fired. Just enough to be dismissed. He fumbled occasionally, pretended to misunderstand simple instructions, kept his voice low, his gaze lowered, his posture slightly uncertain. To anyone watching, he was just another struggling worker trying to keep up. To Mr. Briggs, he was barely worth noticing, and that gave Ethan something priceless. Freedom. People revealed themselves when they thought no one important was watching, and in their eyes, Ethan wasn't important. He was the guy you sent on errands, the one you blamed when things went wrong, the one who didn't matter. So they stopped filtering themselves around him. And that was when the truth really started pouring out. "Hey, you!" Briggs' voice rang out across the store. Ethan turned slowly as if unsure he was being called. Yes, sir. Briggs pointed at a shelf. That arrangement is wrong. Ethan looked at it. It wasn't. Not even slightly. I... I thought this was how. I didn't ask what you thought. Briggs snapped. Fix it. Yes, sir. Ethan moved quickly, deliberately, making the process look clumsy. A box slipped slightly from his grip. Not falling. Just enough to seem careless. Briggs scoffed loudly. Useless. He muttered loud enough for others to hear. A few workers glanced over, then quickly looked away. No one defended him. No one ever did. Ethan kept his expression neutral, but inside he was watching, recording every word, every tone, every pattern. That evening, Ethan made his first real move, a small device hidden carefully in his pocket, recording everything. Every insult, every threat, every illegal instruction. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was collecting, building a case brick by brick. It didn't take long for Briggs to fully settle into his usual behavior. And now Ethan became one of his favorite targets. Why are you so slow? Briggs snapped one afternoon. I'm trying, sir. Trying isn't good enough. Briggs shot back. People like you are replaceable. Ethan nodded quietly. I understand. Briggs leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. You should be grateful I even hired you. Ethan met his gaze briefly, then lowered his eyes again. Yes, sir. Inside something burned. Not pride, not ego, but anger, because this man thought he could treat people like this without consequence. And until now, he had been right. Ethan kept his distance from Layla during work hours, carefully, deliberately. He couldn't risk drawing attention to her, not yet. But that didn't mean he wasn't watching. He noticed everything. The way she avoided being alone near the manager's office. The way her smile faded whenever Briggs entered the room. The way she worked harder than anyone else just to avoid giving him a reason. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, because men like Briggs didn't need reasons. They created them. Ironically, the more Ethan played the fool, the more the workers began to trust him. Not because they respected him, but because they saw him as harmless, safe. One of them, "You're new, right?" a stock worker asked one afternoon. Ethan nodded. Yeah. The man sighed. You'll get used to it. To what? The man glanced around before answering. This place. Ethan tilted his head slightly. What about it? The man hesitated, then shrugged. Just keep your head down, he said. That's how you survive here. That word again. Survive. Not work. Not grow. Survive. Later that day, Ethan noticed something. One of the younger workers, barely more than a teenager, was struggling to carry a heavy crate. He was clearly exhausted, his hands shaking, but he kept going because stopping wasn't an option. Ethan walked over quietly. Let me help you. The boy looked surprised. You sure? Ethan nodded. Together they lifted the crate, set it down. The boy exhaled in relief. Thanks, he said quietly. Ethan gave a small smile. No problem. A simple moment, but it mattered, because in a place filled with fear, even small kindness felt rare. That same afternoon, Ethan witnessed something that confirmed everything. Briggs called one of the female employees aside, not Layla this time, another girl, younger, nervous. Ethan didn't need to hear the words. He saw enough. The way she stood stiffly, the way Briggs leaned in too close, the way her eyes darted around looking for escape, but finding none. Ethan's hands clenched again. This wasn't isolated. This was habitual routine, and that made it even worse. At one point, Briggs turned his attention back to Ethan. You, he barked. Ethan approached quickly. Yes, sir. Clean the back storage area, Briggs ordered. It's a mess. It was cleaned this morning. Briggs' eyes narrowed. What did you just say? Ethan paused just for a second, then lowered his head. I'll clean it again, sir. Briggs smirked. That's better. But in that brief moment, there had been something in Ethan's tone. Something different. Not defiance, but awareness. Briggs noticed it barely, but enough to plant a seed of curiosity. After the shift ended, Ethan stepped outside again. The air felt cooler, quieter, less suffocating. Layla was already there, sitting, this time staring at the ground. He approached slowly. You look tired, he said gently. She let out a soft laugh. That obvious? Ethan nodded. She sighed. It's been a long day. They sat in silence for a moment. Then she spoke again. You don't act like the others, she said. Ethan glanced at her. How so? She shrugged slightly. You're calm, she said, even when he talks to you like that. Ethan thought for a moment. Maybe I've just learned not to react to everything. She looked at him. Or maybe you don't understand how bad it can get. Ethan held her gaze. I understand more than you think. There was something different about their conversations. Now less guarded, more real. Layla wasn't fully open yet, but she wasn't closed off either. And Ethan, he found himself looking forward to these moments, more than he should, more than he expected, because in the middle of all this darkness, she was something else, something genuine, something worth protecting. That night Ethan reviewed everything he had gathered so far. Audio recordings, observations, patterns. It was building, but not enough, not yet. He needed something stronger, something undeniable, something that would bring everything crashing down without giving Briggs a chance to escape. Ethan leaned back, thinking, strategizing, and then an idea formed slowly, carefully, dangerously. Back at the store, the next day Ethan resumed his role, the quiet worker, the overlooked one, the fool. Briggs barely paid him attention now, and that was perfect because the less he noticed Ethan, the closer he was to losing everything. As Ethan stood in the aisle arranging products with deliberate slowness, his eyes briefly flicked toward the manager's office, then toward Layla, then back to his task. His expression remained neutral, unbothered, invisible. But inside everything was set. Just a little longer. He thought just a little more evidence, and then he would end it, not quietly, not gently, but completely. By the end of the week, something had changed. Not in the store, not in the way people were treated, not in the suffocating tension that clung to every corner like an invisible fog. That was all still there. Still heavy. Still wrong. But between Ethan and Layla, something had shifted. It started with something small, recognition, not just seeing each other but noticing. Ethan no longer had to search for her in the store. His eyes found her naturally at register 3, always there. And Layla, she had started noticing him too. At first it was subtle, a quick glance when he passed by, a slight pause before looking away, then eventually a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement. It didn't look like much to anyone else, but in a place where people avoided connection, it meant everything. That afternoon, Ethan found her outside again. But this time, she wasn't crying. She sat on the concrete step, a small food container resting on her lap. She looked tired, yes, but calmer, less fragile. Ethan approached slowly. Mind if I join you? He asked. She looked up. For a second she seemed surprised. Then she shook her head slightly. No, it's okay. He sat beside her, leaving just enough space to keep things comfortable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was easy. You always eat out here? Ethan asked. Layla shrugged slightly. It's quieter, she said. Inside feels heavy. Ethan nodded. I get that. She glanced at him. You do. More than I expected to, he replied. She studied him for a moment, like she was trying to figure him out. You don't seem like someone who belongs here, she said suddenly. Ethan smiled faintly. Funny, he said. I was thinking the same thing. About you. She let out a soft laugh. The sound caught him off guard. It was light, genuine, and for a brief moment it erased all the sadness he had seen in her. "What about you?" Ethan asked. "What did you want to do before all this?" Layla looked down at her food. For a moment she didn't answer. Then quietly, "I wanted to study nursing." Ethan's brows lifted slightly. "That's a good dream." She smiled faintly. "Was." He tilted his head. "What changed?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Life," she said simply. Ethan didn't interrupt, didn't rush her, just waited. And that patience, it opened the door. "My parents died 3 years ago," she said softly. Ethan's expression softened. "I'm sorry." She nodded slightly. "It was sudden, an accident." Her voice wavered just a little. "I have 2 younger siblings," she continued, "a boy and a girl still in school." Ethan listened carefully. "They depend on me," she added. "Everything I earn goes to them." That explained the weight she carried, the pressure, the fear of losing this job. "Why didn't you continue school?" Ethan asked gently. She gave a small, sad smile. "Because someone had to choose between dreams and survival." Ethan exhaled slowly. "And you chose them." She nodded. "Always." Ethan looked at her differently now, not just as someone in pain, but as someone strong, stronger than most people he had ever met. "You know," he said quietly, "not everyone would have done that." Layla shrugged. "I didn't really see it as a choice. That doesn't make it less admirable." Ethan replied. She looked at him again, and this time her eyes softened. "What about you?" she asked. "What's your story?" Ethan paused. He couldn't tell her the truth, not yet. So he gave her something close to it. "I've worked a lot of different jobs," he said. "Nothing stable. Family." He shook his head slightly. "Not really. That part wasn't entirely a lie." Layla nodded slowly. "Then you understand," she said. Ethan met her gaze. "Yes," he said softly. "I do." They sat there for a while longer, talking about small things, simple things, childhood memories, favorite foods, things that had nothing to do with the store, nothing to do with pain. And for a brief moment, they were just two people, not victims, not observers, just human. The moment shattered the second they stepped back into the store. The tension returned immediately. The weight, the fear, the watchful eyes. And then Briggs. He stood near the counter watching. His gaze lingered on Layla for just a second too long. Ethan noticed it instantly. So did she. Her shoulders stiffened, her expression changed. And just like that, the calm was gone. Ethan felt it again, that sharp rising anger. But this time it was mixed with ported, something else. Protectiveness. Stronger than before. Because now she wasn't just someone he wanted to help. She was someone he cared about. And that made everything more complicated. That evening their paths crossed again. This time inside. Brief. Careful. "You okay?" Ethan asked quietly as he passed by. Layla nodded. "I will be." It wasn't convincing, but it was something. As the days passed, their conversations became more frequent, more natural. They laughed more, shared more. And without realizing it, Ethan started looking forward to seeing her. More than anything else in that store. More than the progress of his plan. More than the evidence he was gathering. And that was dangerous. One night as Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he finally admitted it to himself. "This isn't just concern anymore," he murmured. He closed his eyes and saw her. Her smile, her strength, her pain. "I'm falling for her." The words felt strange, unexpected, but true. Complicated everything. Because he wasn't just Eli. He was Ethan Cole, a billionaire, a CEO living a lie. And she trusted him as he was now, not as who he really was. "What happens when she finds out?" he whispered. The question lingered in the darkness unanswered. Ethan sat up slowly, his expression serious now. No, he said quietly. He wouldn't let that stop him, because right now what mattered wasn't who he was. It was what he was doing and who he was protecting. The next day when he saw her again, something in his chest shifted. It was subtle but undeniable. And when she smiled at him just a little, it felt like something he hadn't experienced in years. Something real. Something pure. Something worth fighting for. The tension had been building for days, slowly, silently, like a storm gathering strength just beyond the horizon. Ethan felt it. In every interaction, every glance, every moment. Layla stiffened when Briggs walked by, every time someone lowered their voice out of fear. It was only a matter of time. Something was going to break. He just didn't expect it to happen like this. From the moment Ethan stepped into the store that morning, something felt off. The air was heavier than usual. The workers were quieter, more tense. Even the small whispers that usually floated between shelves were gone. It was like everyone was holding their breath, waiting. Ethan's instincts sharpened immediately. Something had happened or was about to. He found Layla at her usual spot. But the moment he saw her, his chest tightened. She looked pale, more than usual. Her eyes were slightly swollen again. But this time it wasn't just from crying. It was fear, unhidden. She wasn't even pretending. Well, today, and that scared him. Because Layla always tried to hide it. Their eyes met briefly, and in that 1 second she told him everything without speaking. Something is wrong. Ethan's jaw tightened. He moved closer, pretending to adjust items nearby. Layla, he said under his breath. She didn't look at him. Don't, she whispered quickly. The word was soft but urgent. A warning. Ethan froze. That was new. Layla. Briggs' voice cut through the store, sharp, demanding. Layla flinched. Actually flinched. Ethan saw it clearly. Office. Now. No. No patience. Just control. Layla's hands trembled slightly as she stepped away from the counter. Ethan's entire body went tense. Not again. Not like this. As she walked toward the back hallway, Ethan's mind raced. Wait. Watch. Stick to the plan. That was what he had been doing. That was what he was supposed to keep doing. But something inside him, something deeper than logic, refused. Because this wasn't just another incident anymore. This was escalating. And Layla, she looked like she was about to break. Ethan moved before he could stop himself. Not running, not obvious, just moving carefully, quietly. He followed at a distance, keeping his steps controlled. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit, too quiet. And at the end, the office door closed. Ethan stopped just outside. His heart was pounding. Not from fear, from anger. He could hear muffled voices inside. Briggs, Layla. He strained to listen. Tired of your attitude. Briggs' voice came through faintly. I'm just doing my job. Layla's voice, nervous, controlled. You think I don't notice how you avoid me? Briggs snapped. A pause. Then I'm not avoiding you, sir. A lie. A necessary one. Ethan clenched his fists. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Briggs said, his tone shifting lower, more dangerous. I told you what I want. Silence. Ethan's chest tightened. I can't. Layla said, her voice shaking now. You can. Briggs replied smoothly. You just won't. Another pause. Then a sound. A sudden movement. A gasp. That was it. That was the moment. Ethan didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't plan. He just moved. The door swung open with force. And what he saw made everything inside him snap. Briggs stood too close, far too close. One hand gripping Layla's arm tightly. She looked trapped, cornered. her eyes wide with fear. "Let her go." Ethan's voice was calm but deadly. Both of them turned. Briggs' expression shifted instantly from surprise to anger. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. Ethan didn't move. "Let her go," he repeated. Briggs laughed. Actually laughed. "You've got some nerve," he said. "Walking into my office like this." Ethan stepped forward slightly. "Take your hand off her." Layla's eyes flicked between them, fear rising. "Eli, don't," she whispered. Too late. Briggs tightened his grip slightly. Or what he challenged. The room went still heavy, dangerous. Ethan held his gaze. And for the first time, there was no trace of the fool he had been pretending to be. No hesitation. No submission. Just control, cold, measured. "You don't want to find out," Ethan said quietly. Something shifted. Briggs noticed it. That tone, that confidence. It didn't match the man he thought he knew. And for a brief second uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Who do you think you are?" Briggs snapped, trying to regain control. Ethan didn't answer immediately, because the truth was sitting right on the edge of his tongue. But he swallowed it. "Not yet. Not like this. Instead," he said, "someone who won't stand by and watch this happen." Briggs scoffed. "You think you're some kind of hero," he said. "You're nothing here." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Maybe," he said calmly, "but I'm still standing here." The tension snapped tighter. Then Briggs shoved Layla away. Not violently, but enough. Enough to make a point. "Get out," he snapped at her. Layla didn't hesitate. She moved quickly toward the door, her breathing uneven. As she passed Ethan, their eyes met briefly. Fear, relief, and something else. Trust. The door closed behind her, and now it was just the two of them. Briggs stepped closer. "You've made a big mistake," he said, his voice low. Ethan didn't move. "I don't think so." Briggs smirked. "You're fired." The words were meant to land hard, to end it, to restore control. But Ethan, he just looked at him, and then he smiled slightly. "Not yet," he said. Briggs frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You'll find out." It wasn't a threat. Not exactly, but it felt like one. And Briggs, he felt it. That unease came back stronger this time. Ethan turned and walked toward the door, calm, unhurried, controlled. But inside, his heart was still racing because he had just crossed the line, a big one. Layla stood a few steps away from the office, waiting, her hands still trembling. When Ethan stepped out, she rushed toward him. "Are you crazy?" she whispered urgently. "He's going to fire you." Ethan looked at her. Really looked at her. "You're okay." She blinked, caught off guard. Yes, but that's not the point." "It is to me," he said quietly. She froze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Layla shook her head slightly. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "He's going to make things worse now." Ethan's gaze hardened. "Then let him try." There it was again, that tone, that quiet confidence. Layla noticed it more clearly this time. "You're not who I thought you were," she said slowly. Ethan held her gaze. "Maybe I am," he said. "Or maybe you just didn't see everything." From that moment on, everything changed. Briggs no longer ignored Ethan. Now he watched him closely, suspiciously. And Ethan, he knew. The clock had started ticking. He didn't have much time left. As Ethan returned to work, he didn't look back. But his mind was already moving ahead, planning, adjusting, preparing. Because now this wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. This was war, and there was no turning back. After the confrontation, nothing went back to normal. Not that things had ever been normal to begin with, but now the tension had a new edge, sharper, more dangerous, because the balance had shifted. Ethan felt it the moment he stepped into the store the next morning. The atmosphere hadn't just changed, it had tightened like a rope pulled too far. Workers were quieter than ever, more cautious, more alert. And Briggs, he was watching, not casually, not dismissively, intentionally. Before, Ethan had been invisible. Now he was a problem. Briggs stood near the front of the store, arms crossed, his gaze tracking Ethan's movements like a predator sizing up unfamiliar prey. Ethan noticed it immediately and adjusted. His posture relaxed, his movements slowed again. The fool returned, but this time, it was more deliberate than ever, because now he wasn't just hiding, he was baiting. As Ethan passed near Layla's counter, she spoke without looking at him. "He's watching you." Ethan didn't stop. "I know. You need to be careful," she whispered. "I am." She finally glanced at him. There was worry in her eyes, real worry. "You don't understand," she said. "He doesn't let things go." Ethan's lips curved slightly. "Neither do I." That night, Ethan sat in his apartment reviewing everything again. The recordings, the patterns, the testimonies he had quietly gathered. It was strong, very strong, but not enough. Not yet. Because men like Briggs didn't fall from suspicion, they fell from undeniable proof. Something public, something inescapable, something that couldn't be explained away. Ethan leaned back, his mind racing. "I need him to expose himself," he murmured. "To trap someone, you had to understand them." And Ethan understood Briggs now. He wasn't just abusive, he was arrogant, careless, used to power, used to control, and most importantly, used to getting away with everything. That was his weakness, because people like that didn't stop, they escalated. The next day, Ethan made his first intentional move, subtle, small, but strategic. He made himself available, more visible, more present. Not enough to raise alarm, but enough to exist in Briggs' line of sight. And as expected, Briggs noticed. "Hey, you!" Briggs called out. Ethan turned slowly. "Yes, sir." Briggs studied him for a moment, longer than usual, like he was trying to figure something out. "You've been different lately." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "I'm just trying to do better at my job." Briggs smirked. "Don't try too hard," he said. "Wouldn't want you thinking you matter." Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." But inside, he was already 2 steps ahead. That evening, Ethan made his boldest move yet. Carefully, quietly, he placed small recording devices in key locations: the storage room, the back hallway, and most importantly, near the manager's office. Not inside, that would be too risky, but close enough to capture voices, conversations, evidence. His movements were precise, calculated, because one mistake and everything would collapse. Then came the hardest part, waiting. Ethan returned to his routine, working, observing, listening, letting the tension build. Because a trap wasn't just about setup, it was about timing, and timing was everything. Briggs didn't take long to act. 2 days later, he called Layla again. "Office," he said sharply. Ethan felt the shift instantly. The room seemed to tighten around that single word. Layla hesitated just for a second, then stood. "Yes, sir." Ethan's fists clenched slightly. Not again. But this time he was ready. As Layla walked toward the back, Ethan moved too. Not directly, not obviously. He took a different route, circling, positioning himself near one of the recording devices, close enough to hear, far enough not to be seen. His heart pounded, not from fear, from anticipation. Because this was moment. At first the voices were muffled, then clearer. Briggs, cold, controlled. "You think I didn't notice," he said. "I don't know what you mean," Layla replied, her voice tight. "Don't play games with me." Pause. "Then you've been talking to him." Ethan's breath stilled. So Briggs had noticed. Dangerous. Very dangerous. "I haven't." "Don't lie," Briggs snapped. Silence followed, heavy. "You think he can protect you?" Briggs continued, his voice lowering. "He's nothing here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't understand, Layla," said her voice shaking. "No," Briggs replied. "You don't understand." Another pause. "Then if you don't start cooperating," he said slowly, "I'll make sure both of you are gone." There it was, the threat, clear, undeniable. Ethan's eyes darkened. Everything was being recorded, every word, every tone, every threat. This was what he needed, but still he waited, because one more push would make it perfect. Ethan stepped forward slightly closer to the door, close enough now that if things escalated he could intervene. Inside, Briggs continued. "I've been patient," he said, "but I'm done waiting." Layla's voice trembled. "I'm just trying to do my job." "Then do it the way I want." "Silence, then I won't." The words were quiet but firm. Ethan's chest tightened. That was new. That was courage. There was a sudden movement inside, a sharp sound, a chair scraping. Ethan didn't wait. He pushed the door open. Briggs turned sharply, anger flashing across his face. "What are you doing?" he snapped. But this time something was different, because Ethan didn't look hesitant. He didn't look unsure. He looked ready. "I think that's enough," Ethan said calmly. Briggs narrowed his eyes. "You again." Ethan stepped further into the room, his gaze steady, unshaken. "I've heard enough," he said. Briggs scoffed. "You think anyone will believe you?" Ethan's lips curved slightly. "I don't need them to believe me." Pause. "Then I just need them to hear you." For the first time, real fear flickered across Briggs' face. "What are you talking about?" Ethan reached into his pocket, slowly pulled out the small recording device, and held it up. Briggs' expression changed instantly. Shock, then anger, then something else, panic. "You've been talking a lot," Ethan said calmly. "Threats, harassment, abuse." He took a step closer. "And now it's all documented." The room fell silent, heavy, final. Because in that moment everything Briggs had built, every lie, every act of control, started to crumble. Layla stood frozen, her eyes moving between them, trying to process what was happening. Ethan glanced at her briefly. "It's over," he said quietly. She didn't respond, not yet. Because it didn't feel real, not yet. Briggs laughed, suddenly forced, desperate. "You think this is enough," he said. "You're just a worker." Ethan met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no disguise left in his eyes. "Am I?" he said softly. That question, it lingered heavy, unanswered, but not for long. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were closing in on the truth that was about to unfold. Ethan stood calmly in the center. Layla remained frozen near the door. And Briggs was unraveling. "You think this is a game?" Briggs snapped, though his voice lacked the confidence it once carried. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He simply watched him, studied him like a man observing something already defeated, but not yet aware of it. "This recording means nothing." Briggs continued, his tone rising. "I can have you thrown out of here before you even open your mouth." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You could try." The calmness in his voice was unsettling, unnatural. And for the first time, Briggs noticed it fully. Something wasn't right. This man, this Eli, he wasn't afraid. Not even a little. "You've been very confident for someone in your position," Briggs said, slowly narrowing his eyes. Ethan's lips curved slightly. "And what position is that?" Briggs stepped forward. "A replaceable worker," he said sharply. "A nobody." Ethan let out a quiet breath. "Then that's where you're wrong." The words landed differently this time, heavier, certain, and the room went still. Ethan reached into his pocket again. But this time it wasn't the recording device. It was his phone. He unlocked it calmly, tapped the screen once, and held it up. "Take a good look," he said. Briggs frowned, annoyed, suspicious. But he glanced at the screen anyway. And the moment he did, everything changed. His face drained. Not slowly, not subtly, instantly. "No," he muttered. His eyes widened disbelief, shock, fear all at once. That's not, he shook his head. That's not possible. Ethan lowered the phone. Now there was no softness left in his expression. No trace of Eli, only Ethan Cole. My name, he said calmly, is Ethan Cole. Silence complete total. The kind of silence that feels loud, heavy, unavoidable. Layla blinked once, twice, like her mind refused to process what she had just heard. Briggs staggered back slightly. No, you're lying, he said quickly. You're trying to scare me. Ethan didn't move, didn't react. I own this company. The words landed like thunder. Briggs laughed, but it was wrong, forced, unstable. You expect me to believe that, he said. The CEO of this company is stocking shelves, cleaning floors. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. I wanted to see the truth, he said. And now I have. Briggs' confidence shattered piece by piece right in front of them. You're serious, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the truth was already there. Undeniable, unavoidable. Behind them, Layla took a step back. Her heart was racing, her thoughts spinning. Ethan Cole, the name echoed in her mind. The man she had been talking to, trusting, laughing with, opening up to, wasn't just a coworker. He was everything: power, authority, wealth. And suddenly everything made sense. His calmness, his confidence, the way he spoke, the way he wasn't afraid. But instead of relief, something else crept in. Why, she whispered. Ethan turned slightly toward her. Their eyes met, and in that moment he saw it: the confusion, the disbelief, the betrayal. I can explain, he said softly, but she shook her head slightly. Not ready. Not yet. Sir, Mr. Cole, I didn't know, Briggs stammered, stepping forward quickly. The shift was immediate, from dominance to desperation. If I had known, that's exactly the point. Ethan cut in sharply. His voice changed, colder, sharper. You didn't know. Pause. And that's why you showed me who you really are. Briggs swallowed hard. I can explain everything, he said quickly. There's been misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. Ethan repeated. His voice was calm, again, but dangerous. You call harassment a misunderstanding? Briggs froze. You call threats a misunderstanding? Silence. You call abuse a misunderstanding? Each word hit harder than the last. Ethan held up the recording device again. This, he said, is just one piece. He took a step closer. There's more. Another step. Days of recordings. Another. Witness accounts. Another. Patterns of behavior. Briggs' back hit the desk. Behind him. He had nowhere left to go. And if that wasn't enough, Ethan added calmly, there are already people on their way. Briggs' eyes widened. Ethan glanced at his watch briefly. They should be here any minute. As if on cue, voices echoed from outside, firm, official, the sound of footsteps approaching quickly. Then a knock, sharp, authoritative. The door opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a corporate legal representative. The atmosphere shifted instantly from confrontation to judgment. Mr. Briggs, one of the officers asked. Briggs didn't respond. He couldn't. He just stood there, frozen. You're under investigation for multiple complaints, the officer continued. Workplace harassment, abuse of authority, financial misconduct. Each charge felt like a hammer striking down. Briggs shook his head. No, this isn't. This is a mistake. It's not. Ethan said, quietly. Sir, you'll need to come with us, the officer said firmly. Briggs looked at Ethan, desperate, panicked. Please, he said. We can fix this. Ethan didn't respond, didn't even blink, because this was the consequence. As the officers moved to escort him out, Briggs resisted slightly. This isn't over, he snapped. But his voice had lost everything it once held: power, authority, control, all gone. And as he was led out of the office, no one no one defended him, because fear had finally lost. The room fell quiet again. But this time it was different, lighter, freer. Ethan exhaled slowly. It was done. He turned to Layla. She was still standing there, still processing, still trying to understand everything. Layla, he began, but she stepped back just slightly, not out of fear but distance, emotional distance. "You lied to me," she said softly. The words hit harder than anything Briggs had said. Ethan swallowed. "I didn't lie," he said carefully. "I just didn't tell you everything." She shook her head. "That's the same thing. I needed to understand what was happening here," Ethan said. "If I came as myself, I would have seen nothing but a perfect performance." Layla didn't respond immediately. She understood that. Part of her did. "But still, you let me think you were like me," she said. Ethan's voice softened. "I am." She looked at him. Really looked at him. "No," she said quietly. "You're not." There it was, the gap not just between truth and lies, but between their worlds. And for the first time, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected, fear not of losing power, but of losing her. The store had never been this quiet before, not even during closing hours, not even during inspections. The silence was different. It wasn't fear anymore. It was shock. Words spread faster than anyone expected. Within minutes of Briggs being let out in handcuffs, the entire supermarket had shifted into a state of disbelief. Workers stood in small groups, whispering, processing, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. "Did you see that? They actually arrested him. I thought nothing would ever happen." The same man who once controlled their every move was gone just like that. Ethan stood near the front of the store now, no longer blending in, no longer hiding. There was a subtle shift in how he carried himself. Not exaggerated, not arrogant, just natural, like a man finally standing in his own skin again. The worn clothes were still there, but the presence that had changed completely. People noticed, and slowly they started to realize, that's him, the CEO. He was here the whole time. The whispers grew louder. Eyes turned toward him, some filled with disbelief, others with curiosity, and a few with something deeper, relief. Ethan took a slow breath, then stepped forward. "Everyone," he called out. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried naturally. The room quieted almost instantly, all eyes on him now. "I owe you all an explanation," he said. A pause then. "My name is Ethan Cole." No surprise this time. They already knew. But hearing it from him made it real. "I came here because I had reason to believe something was wrong," he continued, "and I needed to see it for myself." He looked around the room at their faces, at the people who had endured so much. "And what I found," he said slowly, "was unacceptable." Ethan's voice softened slightly. "You were mistreated, silenced, taken advantage of." Each word landed carefully. "I failed you," he added. That caught them off guard completely, as men like him didn't usually say things like that. "But that ends today," Ethan said firmly. His tone changed, stronger, decisive. "Every complaint that was ignored will be reviewed. Every unfair deduction will be corrected. Every act of abuse will be addressed." The workers exchanged glances, hope, cautious, fragile, but there. "You deserve to work in a place where you feel safe." Ethan continued, "Where you're respected, where your effort is valued." He paused, then added, "And I'm going to make sure that happens." For a moment, no one spoke, then a quiet voice from the back. "Thank you." Another followed, then another, until slowly the silence broke, not into chaos, but into something softer, relief. Ethan turned slightly to the legal representative beside him. "Begin a full internal audit," he said. "Every department, every record." "Yes, sir." And HR complete restructuring, he added. Anyone complicit in this stays under investigation. The representative nodded. Understood. In that moment, the store no longer felt like a place of fear. Felt like something being rebuilt piece by piece right in front of them. Through all of this, Ethan's eyes searched for one person, Lila, but she wasn't there. She had left quietly while everyone else stayed while everything unfolded. She walked out without a word, because for her this wasn't just about justice. It was personal. "Where's Lila?" Ethan asked one of the workers nearby. The woman hesitated. "She left," she said softly. Ethan frowned slightly. "When?" "A few minutes after." "She didn't finish." "She didn't need to." Ethan nodded slowly. "Of course she left." Everything she thought she understood had changed in an instant, and now she needed space. For the first time since the arrest, Ethan felt it. Not satisfaction. Not victory, something else heavier, because while justice had been served, something between them had been shaken deeply. He didn't wait long. After giving final instructions, Ethan left the store, got into his car, and drove not aimlessly but with purpose because he knew where she would go. The small street was quiet, modest, far from the polished world Ethan usually lived in. He stepped out of the car, slowly looked around, then he saw her sitting outside a small building on a low step just like before. Lila. She didn't look up immediately, but she didn't ignore him either. "I figured you'd come," she said quietly. Ethan walked closer, stopped a few feet away. "I needed to." There was a pause, heavy, different from before, because now everything had changed. "You didn't have to pretend," she said finally. Ethan shook his head slightly. "I wasn't pretending about everything." She looked up at him, then her eyes, searching his face. "What was real?" she asked. The question cut deep. Ethan took a breath. "Talking to you," he said, "that was real." Her expression softened just slightly. "And everything else?" she asked. "I needed to understand what was happening," he said. "I needed the truth." She nodded slowly. "I get that," she admitted. A pause, "but it still hurts." Ethan stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "I know," she replied softly. "And I never looked down on you," he added. Her eyes flickered. "I know that too." "Then what's wrong?" Ethan asked gently. She hesitated, then said, "You're not just Eli." He nodded. "I know. You're everything," she said. The word carried weight, not admiration, distance. "I don't belong in your world," she continued. Ethan's expression shifted. "Who says that?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Reality." Ethan shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "That's not how I see it." Lila looked at him for a long moment, then. "You really mean that?" she asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes." And for the first time since the reveal, something in her expression changed. Not fully healed, not fully convinced, but open just a little. They sat there quietly. Not like before, but not completely distant either, somewhere in between, trying to find their way back. Ethan had taken down a corrupt man, restored order, given people hope, but this was different. This couldn't be fixed with authority or power or control. This would take time. The days after the arrest felt different, not just in the store, but between them. Everything had changed, and yet something still remained, something fragile, unfinished. The supermarket no longer felt like a place people endured, felt like something being rebuilt, carefully, intentionally. New management had stepped in, temporary but already more respectful. Workers moved more freely, now spoke more openly. There was still caution, still adjustment, but the fear, the suffocating fear that once controlled everything, was gone. And in its place was something unfamiliar: hope. Lila came back 2 days later, not because everything was okay, but because she had responsibilities, bills, her siblings. Life didn't pause for emotional healing. Ethan noticed her immediately. Of course he did. He always did. But this time he didn't approach right away. He gave her space, let her settle, let her breathe because he understood now. This wasn't something he could rush. When their eyes finally met, it wasn't like before. There was no easy smile, no light laughter, just a quiet acknowledgement, a silent understanding. We're still here. And somehow that meant more than anything else. That evening, Ethan stood in his office, not the small apartment, not the disguise, his real office high above the city. But it didn't feel the same anymore, because his mind wasn't on business, it was on her. I can't just go back to how things were, he murmured, because what he felt, it wasn't temporary, it wasn't situational, it was real, and he wasn't willing to lose it. The next day, Ethan returned to the store, not in disguise this time, but not in full corporate display either. Simple, approachable, intentional. He didn't want to intimidate her, he just wanted to talk. He found her during her break outside. Same spot, same quiet corner. But this time she looked up before he spoke. You don't have to keep coming here, she said softly. Ethan sat down anyway. I know. A pause. I want to. She studied him for a moment, trying to read. Him trying to understand him. I don't want to lie to you anymore, Ethan said. Her expression shifted slightly. That's a good start, she replied. He nodded. So ask me anything. She blinked. Anything, anything. A moment of hesitation. Then why me? She asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately because the truth wasn't simple. Because you were real, he said finally. She frowned slightly. I don't understand. You didn't treat me like I was important, he explained. You didn't expect anything from me. He met her gaze. You were just you. Layla looked down briefly. So you liked me. Because you thought I didn't know who you were. Ethan shook his head. No, he said. I liked you because of who you are. Pause. And I still do. Her breath caught slightly. That's not fair, she said softly. Ethan frowned. How you got to know me, she said. The real me. My struggles. My life. She looked at him. Again. But I didn't get the same chance. That he couldn't argue with. You're right, Ethan said. And that alone surprised her. So he continued. I didn't give you the full picture, he admitted. And you deserve that. He leaned back slightly. Everything you saw, how I listened, how I cared, how I showed up for you, that wasn't fake. Her eyes searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. She found none. I don't let people in easily, Ethan said quietly. And somehow, you got past that. Layla's expression softened just a little. How? She asked. Ethan smiled faintly. I'm still trying to figure that out. Something changed in that moment. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough. Enough for the tension between them to loosen just a little. So what now? Layla asked. Ethan looked at her. Now we start again. She raised an eyebrow slightly. Start again. No lies, he said. No pretending. Just us. Layla hesitated because part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him. But another part, the part shaped by hardship and reality, held her back. It's not that simple, she said. Ethan nodded. I know. You live a completely different life than I do, she continued. And that matters. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Only if we let it. She looked at him. You really believe that? Yes, without hesitation, without doubt. Silence settled between them again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't tense. It was thoughtful. And then Layla smiled. Just a little. "You're very stubborn," she said. Ethan smirked. "I've been told that." "Okay," she said softly. Ethan's heart skipped slightly. "Okay." She nodded. "We start again. Not fully healed, not fully certain, but willing." And that was everything. The days that followed felt lighter, easier. They talked more. Not like before, but not distant either. They learned each other. Again. This time with truth. Ethan visited more often. Not as a boss, not as a CEO, just as Ethan. They shared meals, laughed again, slowly rebuilt what had been shaken. And somewhere along the way, the feelings that had started quietly grew stronger, deeper, unavoidable. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset from outside her home, Layla spoke softly. "You didn't have to stay," she said. Ethan glanced at her. "I know, but you did." He smiled slightly. "Because I wanted to." She looked at him, really looked at him. And this time there was no doubt in her eyes. "I think," she started, then paused. Ethan waited. "I think I'm falling for you," she said quietly. The words were soft, but they carried everything. Ethan's chest tightened. Not painfully, but fully, completely. "I already have," he said. And in that moment there was no CEO, no cashier, no rich, no poor, just two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way. The city looked different that morning. Not because anything had changed. The buildings still stood tall. The streets were still busy. Life moved as it always did. But for Ethan, everything felt new. Sunlight poured through the wide glass windows of his penthouse, casting a golden glow across the room. Ethan stood quietly by the window, adjusting the cuff of his suit. Not the kind he wore for meetings. Not the kind meant to impress investors. This one was different, simpler, but more meaningful, because today wasn't about business. Today was about love. His reflection stared back at him, sharp, confident, but softer than before. Changed. And, as he stood there, his mind drifted back to the beginning. To the day he walked into that supermarket disguised, curious, determined. He had gone looking for the truth. What he found was something far greater. He remembered the first time he saw her, behind the counter trying to smile through tears. At the time he didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but something about her had stayed with him. Something real. Something that refused to be ignored. And now she was about to become his wife. Ethan let out a quiet breath. He had built companies, closed deals worth millions, earned respect in rooms filled with powerful people. But none of it felt like this. Because this wasn't something he earned through strategy or power or control. This was something he found and chose. Across the city, in a modest but beautifully decorated home, Layla sat in front of a mirror. Her hands rested gently in her lap, still but not calm. Her heart raced, her thoughts swirling. "This is really happening," she whispered. She looked at herself in the mirror. For a moment she didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. Not because she looked different, but because she felt different. Stronger, whole, peace. Gone was the girl who cried behind the supermarket. Gone was the fear that once followed her every step. In her place stood someone new. Someone who had survived, grown, and found love. Her mind drifted to long days, to sleepless nights, to moments where she felt like she had no way out. She remembered the fear, the pressure, the quiet suffering she had learned to carry. And then she remembered him, Ethan, or Eli as she first knew him. The man who didn't look away, who didn't pretend not to see, who listened, who stayed, who fought. Not just for her, but for everyone. A soft smile touched her lips. "He really came into my life like that," she murmured. "Unexpected, unplanned, unbelievable, and yet completely real. Are you ready?" A voice called from behind her. Layla turned. Her younger sister stood in the doorway, smiling brightly. "You look amazing," she added. Layla laughed softly. I hope so. Her brother stepped in next, adjusting his tie awkwardly. You definitely do, he said. Seeing them there happy, healthy, smiling, it meant everything. Because for so long they had depended on her. And now things were different, better, stable. After everything that happened, Ethan didn't just fix the company. He made sure Layla's life changed too. Not by handing her everything, but by giving her opportunity. She went back to school, started pursuing her dream of becoming a nurse again. Her siblings returned to school without worry. And for the first time in years they could breathe. The ceremony was simple, elegant, filled with warmth. Not overly extravagant, but meaningful. Because that's what mattered to both of them. Ethan stood at the altar, his hands clasped lightly in front of him, waiting. Then the music shifted and she appeared. Layla stepped forward slowly, her dress flowing gently with each step. The room seemed to fade. Everyone blurred into the background. Because in that moment, all Ethan saw was her. Their eyes met. And just like that, every moment they had shared flashed between them. The pain, the struggle, the quiet conversations, the laughter, the growth, all of it leading here. She reached him, stood in front of him, close, real, no secrets, no disguises, no distance, just truth. I never expected to meet you like that, Ethan said softly. A small ripple of laughter moved through the guests. But I'm grateful I did, he continued, because you showed me something I didn't even realize I was missing. He took a breath. You showed me what it means to truly see someone and to be seen. Layla smiled softly. And you showed me that my story didn't end in that place, she said, her voice steady, clear. You reminded me that I could still dream. Pause. And you didn't just say it, you helped me believe it again. I promise to stand with you, Ethan said, not above you, not ahead of you, but with you. Layla's eyes glistened slightly. And I promise to never doubt what we built, she replied, because we didn't find this by chance. We chose it. And now, the officiant said with a smile, you may. Ethan didn't wait for the full sentence. Neither did she. Their lips met, gently, soft, certain, real. Applause filled the room, laughter, joy, relief. But for them it was quiet, because in that moment it was just the two of them. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, Ethan and Layla stepped away briefly out onto a balcony overlooking the city, the same city where everything began. You know, Layla said softly, if you hadn't come to that store, Ethan smiled, I know. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. I would have still been there, and I would have still been searching for answers, he replied. But instead, she said, we found each other. Ethan wrapped an arm gently around her. Best decision I ever made, he said. They didn't just build a relationship. They built a life together, one based on truth, on respect, on understanding, and on love that had been tested and chosen anyway. And as the night settled around them, filled with laughter and light, Ethan looked at her, not as a CEO, not as a man with power, but as someone who had been changed by love. And Layla, she looked at him not as a billionaire, but as the man who saw her when no one else did. He went looking for the truth, and found something far greater, a love that started in silence, grew through struggle, and blossomed into forever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.